Fatherland videos. We have a black sci-fi short story tonight by Gothic Fantasies. This book is presented by Timmy O and Dr. Sandra M. Grayson, Flame Tree Publishing. We're here on page 152. The short story we're reading is called The New Colossuses. This short story is written by Harambee K. Grayson. It took half a moment for Ali to realize he'd been buried alive. He spent the second half and several moments after trying not to panic as he squirmed his horizontal body, attempted to discover his boundaries. He dared not to open his eyes or mouth. He could feel the dirt, or whatever, firmly encasing his body. The only air he had was that trapped inside his lungs. He had to be wise about conserving it. The soil was looser above him, the rest on his face, chest, stomach, and knees. He was mostly clothed, but his feet were bare, his arm and his sides, his palms downward. He couldn't use his hands as shovels, his toes of limited use. He was left to wiggling his entire self while making frequent, desperate attempts at leg lifts and sit-ups. It wasn't a totally unique experience. He'd been involuntarily buried under soaked blankets, trash, and other objects while trying to sleep peacefully in the park or on sidewalks. He'd always gotten out to see another day. Presently, it took some doing, but eventually he managed to sit up to a point where his face felt more air than dirt. With the aid of replenished lungs, he managed to sit up properly and crawl free. Twitchy eyelids eventually allowed his eyes to find daylight, saturated with periwinkle. He emerged into a day as blue as he was in the face, yet he came out of the grave into good air despite its traces of decay. He gulped it down as quickly as he could to get it while jerkily swiveling his head to his left and right, checking for the presence of others. No other figures nearby, not that he could make out anyway, in the haze of brooding over his land of soil and refused bleach of distinct markings by time and the weather. Cans here, plastic stuff there, and him another discard. Whoever had buried him had done a poor job for such a shallow grave. The diggers could have at least checked if he was actually dead first. Involuntarily and stiffly, he shook his head at the waist, then attempted to heave himself to his feet. Through grunts and winces, he made his best efforts to stretch his weary limbs as he checked himself over. Best he could readily tell, he wore a tight yet roomy enough jumpsuit, much of it caked in moist dirt. He did his best to brush himself off, giving up after a minute or so. Though it felt like burlap against his moist skin, the suit had a foil-like sheen. A few tears here and there, more than a few of them claiming then yet tenacious worms attempted to wiggle their own way or out. He picked off the ones he saw. His limited round of stretching hadn't done much good. His joints still ached. His head throbbed. Eyes so often his ears popped as if bubbles were bursting on the surface of his eardrums. Breathing was laborious, but he was alive, standing unsteadily on the spongy ground. under a pale of lavender sky that lent its hue to a precocious haze of moist air, yet alive. If he wanted to remain so, he figured he better get moving. He need food, water, preferably soon. He started off in a direction to which he gave no thought. He couldn't see much, more than 15 feet in either direction, so there was no point to where. He was simply focused on why. Who could have done it? He guessed someone had gotten tired of seeing him camped out in front of their favorite fast food joint, or nursing a cup of coffee in the corner of the chain cafe, parked too close to the rest of rooms, or haunting the rows between library shelves, envying the pages held close by covers despite their dust and mold. Youngish and able-bodied, Ali didn't look like he should be homeless. Maybe that's precisely why he attracted disgust instead of sympathy. The risk of words instead of helping hand, but he gotten by as well as the voices had allowed him to. He was a survivor, even as he now considered. Some deranged worker at one of the shelters he frequented had made up their own mind to dispose of him, but just where had they tried to bury him, and how long ago? A steadier cracking had joined the sporadic popping in his ears. The traces of decay were now intermixed. The traces of decay were now intermixed with more aromatic scents, just as faint, yet reminiscent of women's perfume, those his nostrils had often sampled from passerby on the sidewalks. Ali may have closed his eyes to take a deeper breath, dredging up pleasant memories, just as long as enough for his foot to glance against something hard and cold, sending him to stumble. Regaining his footing, he turned and cast his eyes downward to focus on a large, rusted metal rectangle lying flat, half buried. The works he could make out of reed, reclaimed land, wildlife refuge owned by automotive. They had to be the joke of the day. He'd heard no birds, no barking or baying of any other animal calls. Far as he could tell, only he was here, he and the worms, in this dying day. It was late afternoon, of that he was now certain, as the haze seemed to thin, permitting him to greater range of vision. He began to make out trees, leafless, sparse, easy to avoid. There was no sun, yet close to the ground, on the horizon, he glimpsed spires, golden, gleaming, turban like horns. A maze like a tuft of giant, unyielding weeds. Fixated, he slogged on toward them. The ground was uneven, all around, with pits and trenches, steady inclines and declines. The trees grew less scattered, yet remained, like skeletal arms reaching from the ground, long having given up the struggle for life, yet still imbued with a spirit strong enough to prevent falling. Ali paid little attention to avoiding obstacles. His swaying body seemed to do just fine on its own as he moved along. The haze continuing to thin into wisp more and more. The terrain felt to his feet like cold oatmeal, infused with menthol, firm yet pliable, emitting a cooling sensation with each step. that made its way upward from the soles, easing in physical pain one would normally feel on such trek, while serenading the nostrils with the faint scent of mint. He gone on for he hadn't known how long, bringing the distant gargantuan spires into greater view, continuing for thus far, and trying to guess how many hundreds of feet they stood above the ground, before he noticed, to his left and right, and other upright bodies beyond himself, and the dead trees, men and women trudging in the same direction as he. Others alive? He didn't stare. He gave them only glances. Those around him were big and small, all shapes and sizes, yet similarly garbed. The light wasn't fair to any, but many that he saw seemed weathered. On the north side of the middle age, their expressions door, their parlors those of the winter warriors who lost to the season, and yet all of them seemed possessed of the same determined spirit to reach the spires. None spoke. None even made the effort, not even a pretense. Only hurried looks passed between fellow travelers, those nearer and farther away, before each and every woman and man returned their gaze toward those golden horns. Ali didn't need to converse with the others. The voices in his head carried on their usual conversations, their usual discussions of regrets and whatevers and what-ifs, digressing every now and then to gasp empty words about here and now. The inner voices were familiar, mostly, but as he and his fellow travelers grew thicker in mass and drew nearer the spires, the tones in his mind began to vary, become lighter and darker, more and more foreign, intruding. Why shouldn't I spend my energies on ephemeral partners 15 plus or minus instead of more age appropriate? The younger are all about play, the older, after a few harsh breaks, have come back around that way. Another thought laughed again. Life and love seem implacable. Is there a choice? Bad boy. Bad boy. Come on, my nigga. Another thought wafted again. Life and love seem incapable. Is there a choice? There must have a choice. One in the exercise in the moderation of pain, the other in the inconstant schedule of intense pain and release. Where is the love as I've seen and advertised? Were these the thoughts of this fellow travelers? Ali glanced around, as did the multitude of others, only to find attention inexorably reverting towards the gleaming spires, while another thought found its way into the consciousness. If only I had gotten into the right school, the preschool my parents just knew would be right for me, but no. And how did I end up a fast food franchise? They're right to hate me. Everyone's right to hate me. Another lousy dad trying to buy me with pricey gifts the time that it was when I was a kid. The most expensive one of all, the gift of attention, the present of his presence. But no, he didn't have time at the time. Now I don't want to his damn gifts, or his calls, or his attention. Who has the time? Yet another, I wanted to go out with her so badly, and she expressed interest, smiled at me, even spoke a few nice words. But if I go down that road, I lose myself. I need to finish my sketches, my paintings, two sculptures, all the ideas in my head. Only then I'll safely pursue a beautiful relationship. And yet another, how dare she take credit for my success? I grew up to be a success in spite of her. What did she think? Her parenting method of negligence, seasoned with sporadic yelling and threats, had a hand in molding me to become the perfect white-collar cog in the wheel. I can't wait until some news organization tries to interview their mother again, and another, many, many others. They trudge along as one mass, one body. Were they all sharing the other's thoughts, regrets, and resentments, as whatever else weaving in the different wavelengths? Ali only knew his head was full of these other preoccupations. His own were almost lost to him, though not entirely. Most importantly, he wasn't lost. None among this great mass travelers were. The structure towards which they were all lumbered came in a greater view. A geodesic dome, a mile or more wide, dimpled like a big silvery blue golf ball, and then wrinkled by gleaming golden spires, jolting from the soil, slanting away from the dome, stretching for hundreds of feet. From Ali's perspective, it almost seemed like a bizarre sculpture of the sun, half submerged, struggling to rise from the earth. Steady white noise in his ears. He felt a rapid thumping in his chest, his heart pumping all this time. He was sure, but he only now became cognizant of his working, perhaps due to the exertion of walking for so long. Looking over his shoulders, taking in the sheer number of fellow travelers, he realized that they all had traveled up a hill. Not too steep one, but one that had placed them at a substantial height. Hundreds of dirty, jumpsuited men and women had descended or were ascending from all sides. Many slowed their pace as the nearer, perhaps out of awe, perhaps due to weariness hammering at their bodies, but none among the dreary, bedraggled caravan stopped completely. They converged upon the structure. Ali was no exception. The journey hadn't ended. Many brushed a hand across a spire as they passed, if they happened to near one, but most went straight toward the dome. And seemed to pass right through. It wasn't exactly transparent. The surface seemed more iridescent, fading from one hue to another as he neared it. Yet no matter his position, others still seemed to disappear upon reaching and touching the surface. In the environment's fading light, Ali figured his eyes were playing tricks on him. Only when he drew close enough to the dome's panels to reach out and touch it, he did begin to understand, while keeping his hands to himself without touching. He no hope of guessing their composition, metal, plastic, glass, or something completely unknown. But the surface provided a faint reflection, one clear and detailed enough for him to see he was not the young man he remembered. Wrinkles, thin, gray hair like his fellow travelers. He wasn't a day under 60. The panels also acted as a slightly tinted window, giving view to all manners of tubes, configured in a variety of ways, each filled with a multi-hued mist of radiant on Dalton globe of something. $1 fluctuating between golden and brown, dull and orange, caught his eye. Seemed to call to him. Without thinking, he pressed his hand and faced the glass for a better look, only to be sucked in. He instinctively shut his eyes when he felt his body being jerked forward. Opening them, he saw only the hues that had fascinated him, golden and brown fading to dull orange and gradually going back to brown. He still had a body, but it was immobile, upright, experiencing odd sensations. The globe had him. Welcome, a disembodied, slightly feminine voice invaded his sense of sound. You are forlorn. You were yearn. You who are lost. You who refuses tempters. The voice had a long list of types it welcomed, all of whom seemed like miserable sorts, wretched beings from whom no one had any use, save for this structure, this grand structure in which he was now entrapped. As the voice droned on, Ali's body shivered. His jumpsuit seemed to shred itself, falling away from his trembling body in silvers. He tried to shut his eyes, his ears, blacking out the colors and the tuning out the voice, but the globe had his body and senses, deranging them. While what felt like tendrils swooped in from every which way, darting, piercing, and plucking, jerking, sweeping Ali's naked body, his senses were being acquisitioned, repurposed, moving from sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch far beyond. He struggled. God, he struggled. But he ultimately gave in, having little else to give other than his spirit. His senses no longer belonged to him. His body was converting to another state of being. The colors faded to white as his voice faded away. Gradually, he became aware of a new voice speaking. It sounded like an old flame. It sounded like his mother, his father. It sounded like everyone who had ever cared for him, even momentarily. It explained that the earth, much of its resources had been spent and had entered a new age. Humankind had failed in its half-hearted mission to colonize any other planets. Thus, the great minds left among the great reduced population had banded together to build structures such as these. The whiteness gave way to an aerial view of the structure and the surrounding land from the sky. The structure indeed looked like a sun or a blooming flower. The land itself was a grand island, receiving large boats on its various shores. Men and women in contamination suits drove carts filled with unconscious bodies from the ships to various points on the island, where they proceeded to bury the men and women in shallow graves, allowing them the contaminated soil to further prepare the bodies and regress the minds for the inevitable lurching toward. This dome is of imprisoned static, this factory of new age music, this the mothership of exiles from the other worlds who shall come and replenish ours. Thank you, retirees, for your selfless contributions to giving your whole selves to the dying Earth's beacon. This dome of imprisoned static, this, a sudden shift in perspective showed a mostly black sky filled with stars and some planets and possibly other objects. Ali no longer heard voices of static or anything else as his final conversation nears its completion. Like the others for whom the earth had one final use, he was part of one small part of providing the raw material, the memories of lives and loves and wasted, for the music being broadcast outward beyond the solar system, out toward beings who might exist, who might fill the grove enough to launch their ships, leaving their own planets to dance towards the earth, hopefully with their own songs and rejuvenation, their own instruments of renewal, planted among the temporary graves for the undead, the retired, this or one of the other final music factories dotting the earth. Sending pleasing pleas across the universe might reach saviors or conquerors. At this point, no one cared which, so long as they came.